Good morning. Beis, Volume 2, page closer to the bottom of page 1179. Aleph Kufayin Tes. As I said yesterday, it's clearly now becoming apparent that the Rebbe Rashab is tying together the last 180 pages in explaining how post-symptom, meaning existence which is predicated on the divine concealment, because or else we wouldn't be able to exist, can connect with, not just with Elikus in general, meaning on the terms of the Nivraim, which is the Yesh HaNivra, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, but also ultimately even to pre-symptom. He hasn't said it yet explicitly, but you see here that now it's coming together after explaining Das Elyon, Das Tachten, the two perspectives from above, from below, and that they're both within the divine, the Ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti, Ayin of Yesh HaNivra, the divine energy that reflects the source, the divine energy that's within existence. That now is the beginning of this Bereshis Maimer, he said, both of these perspectives are in the Adam, in the person, in us, meaning that we can achieve these two levels. And he's explaining now the first level, Yichud Tata, which in the language of Kabbalah and Chassidus is Yichud Havaya Elikim Momata L'mayla, from the bottom up, or Shiluv Havaya Adnai. So Adnai, Elikim, is all the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. It's a divine energy manifesting within existence. But it's in a concealed state. So therefore it's like Dibur, like he said, as opposed to Machshav, Dibur. It's expressed, many details. It's a levush hanifred, separate. It's spoken, yes, it's God's words, the Asarim Amoris, the statements that God made, but it's words that can be heard by another, which essentially means an energy that creates and relates to another. So obviously by a human being, when we speak, it only relates to another. We don't create the other, but God's words create the other. And that's still, however, a state of concealment. Then comes what we learned is the Aveda. The Aveda for the person. I'll use the exact words. Vihu Aveda Sa'adam. This is the work of a person. Liyachid Hashem Elikim. To unite Hashem with an Elikim. And how is that done? Through his bonus, to know that you are not a self-created, self-contained entity, that there's a divine energy that creates you and sustains you. And not only to know it, but to come to a hergish, to feel it. Das. That's called the Bittul Hayesh to the Ayin Eliki. So the Yesh, created by the Ayin, is now returning to the Ayin by saying a Bittul, a recognition, and a feeling, a total internal integrated feeling that I am created by you, that I am subjugated. The Bittul is the subjugation, the sublimation. I mentioned the Frierdiker Rebbe says, for Bittul, he says, Ibrigigem, the devotion, that the Yesh is not about worshiping itself, but is devoted to and connected to its source. Okay. And then he said that when the Keli recognizes the Bittul of the Keli to the Oyer, that creates the Kiyam V'chayis. That's where the sustenance and the vitality in the Keli is complete. The Keli L'chayis, a container for energy, for vitality, for life force, is Bittul. Okay. And the second thing you come to understand in this contemplation, V'gam zeis yavin ech sha'helam eina helam amiti. That was the second thing. That not only you come to recognize as a source, that even the concealment that initially did not allow you to see it, it's also not a true helam, because it happened through the Hegvuris. The Eibishter created that concealment through the Hegvuris. Be'emes eina helam klal. And therefore, Meir ha'er the Shem Havaya gamla achre helam. And that's why the Shem Havaya radiates even after the helam. Shenasa al yidei, helam shurak legabe nevraim levad. So the concealment was only from our perspective. So all this is coming to show we've been talking about the process of creation from the top down. Now we're talking the Aveda from the bottom up, how we retrace the steps, as I always point out, how we reconnect. But now he's going to go further into this, in how the Aveda of the person reconnects us to the divine. Now, if you may remember, this was also the language of the Maggid's Torah, that all this is a long parenthesis of Aseh l'chashtei chatzetzes. So just reminiscent of these words, I just wanted to read these words for a moment. He says, if you may recall, which was before we got into the whole tzimtzum and how do you transform the tzimtzum, he said like this. Oh, it's even earlier than I thought. Okay. I'm looking at page, I thought I saw it up now. I'm not seeing it. Well, yeah, I'm looking at page 832. So he says like this, that the Eibishter creates shtei chatzoi tzuras, two halves of one whole, which is godliness and the human being. The goal is for us to connect. She says, in order for that to happen, this is what the God made a number of tzimtzumim, diminishments, through a number of worlds, dimensions, in order for there to be a unity with the Adam, because you need to have, the human being has to not be annihilated or obliterated by the Oir. So he made tzimtzumim derech kama elmas. As bihirase, a human being would not be able to tolerate the intense rate illumination. She made number of tzimtzumim, and then the Maggid continues. So now, once God made the tzimtzumim in order to create the existence and the human being, how does the Achdus implemented, actualized? That a person separates himself from the immersion and the seduction of being held hostage by Gashmius, and he begins to climb Kola Ilmus. That was the discussion. I'm reading from pages, now I read 834. And then he said, that not only that till he gets united with God, that he becomes Bittul b'Metzias, meaning now that your existence is there, it doesn't get now annihilated. It's through the Aveda that you integrate godliness to the point, and I'm just continuing the Lashon, 1 second. Then I go to page Taf Mem. Yeah. Right. And then he continues to speak about how that unity becomes deeper and deeper. Why am I bringing it up? Because when you're reading this, it sounds very similar to that, and it looks like he's bringing it all together. So now he's going to continue in this connection that we make. So what we established so far is that the Yesh is connecting with the Ayin, and that's the Shiluv Havaya Adnai, the Yuchad Havaya B'Elikim. Now he continues. Ach iker, acha iker. I'm reading the line begins chulu. So I'm a little more than a half page down, half the way down. I'll continue reading. Okay, so we've established that yizbeinen, a person contemplates and feels das, the ayin, eliki, recognizes also the concealment is not a real concealment. However, the real Aveda, the primary Aveda, I should say, acha ikeru, the primary work that a person has to do, hu birur ubittul hachumnius. It's the birur, the separation and the clarity, and the bittul and the sublimation, of hachumnius, of the crass and coarseness of the yesh. And this happens, shenasa al yedei aveda shel pitam v'das. This is through the aveda al pitam v'das, an aveda that is a deliberate, concerted contemplation, tam v'das. We're not talking now about Mesiras Nefesh. We're not talking about Ava Mesuteres, the hidden love. We're talking about a person's direct effort to use their mind, tam v'das, shepoil habittul the nefesh habamis, that causes a subjugation and nullification of the animal soul, shelo yumshach achri hatayvus, that it should not be drawn after the desires, its animal desires. So till now he did not mention that. Right now, till now he mentioned how we contemplate and we feel that the divine is the force that creates the yesh, and that the concealment is not a real concealment, only from our perspective. Now he's saying we're talking now actually working with the actual chaymer, the crassness of an animal soul that is drawn to animal desires, the desires of this world, whether it's eating or drinking or sleeping or other physical desires of pleasure. She says that's the ikar, is to create bittul in the nefesh habamis. No, it's not just bittul in the nefesh alikis or the bittul in our awareness of godliness, but actually that the animal soul also is included in this process. That's the ikar. The chol in yonav hagashmim, and all the physical activities or involvements of the person, lo yiyeh l'maylas taivus nafshe, should not be directed toward fulfilling the desires of his nefesh, meaning nefesh habamis, rak bekavona l'shem shamayim. It should all be redirected toward l'shem shamayim for the sake of heaven. Ushiyeh kavona l'kis b'chol davar. That everything you do should have a divine intention, meaning what is it doing to fulfilling the divine goal and objective in this world. So when you eat a meal, what's the kavana, divine kavana, what he calls kavana l'kis in the meal? When you're walking, when you're talking, when you're doing business, whatever it is that you're doing, you're looking for the divine within that experience. So everything you're doing in the physical world is now directed toward the elikus that put it here in the first place. So what he's saying here now, is we're going to learn in a moment, and this is going to bring us back to the discussion of Shabbos and Chel. As I mentioned, the Rebbe Rashab is now tying together the last almost 200 pages. So after explaining this Dasa and Das Tachin, he's now explaining how does it come into play. It comes into action because we are now using that lower perspective. We're still talking about Yechudah Tata. We're taking the Yesh and we're directing it to the Ayin, but not just the Yesh, also in the form of Birur. So till this, what we learned today, he didn't use Birur yet, because we're not talking about Birur HaNefesh HaBamis, we're talking about the human awareness. When it says Vayedaita Ayin v'Shavesa Levavecha, it doesn't say Birur Ha'elam. It says that you should know today, be aware, and feel v'Shavesa Levavecha, and it should carry into your heart ki Havaya Elikim. But then that has to now be carried into the Nefesh Habamis. And now we're getting into the Nefesh Habamis and Chelke Ba'olam. The Rebbe often in Sichos would say the expression that, and this is taken straight from my Chassidus, There's the Aveda of the Nefesh Elikis, getting the Nefesh Elikis inspired, and more than inspired, getting the Nefesh Elikis energized, that it should dominate in your life. The Nefesh Elikis in turn influences the animal soul, that it too should participate. And the expression is that the Nefesh Elikis, the Inyone Gedusha you do, till it permeates also Guf v'Nefesh Abamis v'Chelke be'elam. That's the full picture. The Guf, the body, and the animal soul and its physical desires, and Chelke be'elam means your part in this world, whatever it may be, your work, your travels, everything that your life journey takes you on, wherever you go, whatever you do, all should become an inivresi l'shamish eskeni, in order, all directed toward kol ma shabara kodesh baruch be'elam elebara ela l'chvayde. So this is common language. I'm just using these terms, even though he doesn't use all these Maimonides Chazal. But essentially, that's the Aveda of a person. And it's a struggle because we know there's a concealment. And we all tend to gravitate toward our needs. So this is a struggle to reverse the process. But now he's entered more than just awareness and feeling for God, for the Ayin Eliki, but also actually permeating and the Guf and Nefesh Abamis, the physical and animal soul, and all the activities that you're involved in should all be directed l'shem shamayim to have kavona l'kis. And now he's going to bring it back to what we learned about Birurim. So before I read on, let me just remind you. Before he got into Das Elyon and Das Tachten, which was, like I said, I mentioned in the Rosh Hashanah Maimer on page 1140. What was the discussion before that? Shabbos and Chayil, the work in the 6 days of the week of Birurim. Then comes Shabbos, which is, first he said it's a higher level of Birur. Eichel meteich eichel. Weekdays, it's eichel meteich pselis or pselis meteich eichel, if you recall. Like the work, what do? We take, let's say, any item, a fruit, a vegetable, and you remove the food from the waste, or you remove the waste from the food. That's birur. Shabbos, that's asr. You're not to do that on Shabbos. On Shabbos, however, there's a birur eichel meteich eichel. You can take a piece of food and take out a piece. You can cut off a piece of challah. Eichel meteich eichel. It's also a birur. And then he said there's even a higher level where you come to higher than birurim altogether. It's not birurim. It's shining kedusha, and automatically it elevates everything. And that's where he led into the discussion of the difference between lechem min hashamayim and lechem min haaretz. Bread from earth, which is more the work of the me'achel, and Shabbos is the lechem min hashamayim, which is when the man was manufactured on Shabbos, because it's the same level of Shabbos. It comes from man. It comes from a level of Bittul, of higher than the Atzilus. We talked all the way to Atik. Remember Talad de Bedulucha. So he's talked about the crystal of Atik, and then and then ultimately the call is to draw that down. So he said lechem min hashamayim, Shabbos is Das Elyon, and lechem min haaretz is Das Tachten. Because lechem min haaretz means in the earth. Lechem min haaretz. You're discovering the godliness that comes from earthy, in the earthly matters, in the yesh. And the lechem min hashamayim is amshachim al maila, what he called Das Elyon. We'll get back to that soon in the next page. But now that he said that we're bringing together, we're being Megali, Havaya Belikim, Havaya, Shiur Havaya Adnai, that in the world we are revealing the divine Havaya. So he says now like this, so that comes through Birur, or commotion is barely ill, Be'erech, as was discussed earlier, Be'erech at length, Be'inyan HaBirurim, the Inyan HaBirurim. Birurim means, literally the word birur means to clarify or to separate. But in the context of Aveda, it's to take the Gashmis of this world and separate the Kedusha, the Nitzutz, and recognize there's a spark which is concealed and redeem it, free it, and thereby elevating that item. So that's what birur is. So he says, Ubebeza Ifanim. And in two ways we do the birurim. The birur pselis min ha'echel, removing the waste from the food, which would mean in this case that God put a spark of the divine, let's say, in a piece of bread. And when you recognize that, but the Meitzi Pi Hashem, so the bread itself, the physical bread, if you don't recognize the divine, it's in a way a shell, a klippah. So removing the pselis here means recognizing the core force that gives life to the bread, which is the divine, as opposed to its superficial, its surface level, which can be just for your own indulgence, to feed yourself and make it, and then fill your heart and satisfy your hunger. So birur pselis min ha'echel ubirur ha'echel. Now birur ha'echel b'pashtus, he means echel metoich echel. In other words, pselis metoich echel is getting rid of the waste, which is a weekday type of aveda, and birur ha'echel is in the echel itself to produce even a more refined element of echel. If you want to know where this was discussed, I can refer you right now. We're going back now to yeah, 1062. Lechem in Haaretz. Let me just see here. No, even earlier. Sorry. That's where it starts. Lechem in Haaretz. It starts actually. Yeah, 1140. I'm sorry, 1045. At the bottom of the page, where it starts with all the levels of Birurim. So in a sense, you could say that the first level of Birur is Chayil, Kodesh Metoich Chayil, and Shabbos is Kodesh Metoich Kodesh, meaning constantly elevating in Kedusha itself. As we discussed there, and we discussed the 3 meals of Shabbos, which is also 3 stages of Birur, and all the way to the point that's even higher than Birurim. I'm not going to go over all that now, unless the Rebbe Rashab mentions it more in detail, but I'm just referring to it and giving you the pages where he discussed it. So now he's bringing it and connecting to what we're saying now. That's Birurim. What's a Birurim? However, the form of Birur, whether it's Pselis Metoich Echel or Birur Ha'echel, it's about revealing godliness in this world, to the point that you're also sublimating the physicality of existence. Shai Dezeh Nasim, through this Birurim, Shai Dezeh Nasim, through this Birurim, whatever form of Birur, Nasim Advorim Tachtenim, the thing, the lowest matter, which means the physical, Tachtenim means the Dvorim, the lowest objects in existence, they become Kelim Lelikus. They become containers and vehicles for godliness. Up to the Aveda, they're not. The world is created, you come into a world without Aveda, it is what it is, God created it. The human being comes now and turns everything in this world into becoming a Keli Telikus. And through this, Meir Gilei Elikus Be'elam. And through this is how we then illuminate. Elikus radiates and illuminates in the world. So when we say Gilei Elikus Be'elam, the process is by taking the Elam, the world, and all its objects and creations and entities, and turning it into being a Keli Telikus, to be used for the purpose that God intended it to be used, to reveal the godliness within it all. Yeah. So this is Shiluv Havaya Ba'adnai. This is Mamata Lamaila. This is the lower level of Yechuda Tata. You're taking a world and you're turning it, instead of it being a yesh and directed to itself, you're directing it toward being a channel for godliness. He's now going to go to Shiluv Adnai B'Havaya. So before we continue, any questions? Okay. So then we'll continue. So this begins now the second perspective, the second level of Avodah. V'omnom, and now, or with a qualification. However, v'omnom, Shiur Adnai b'Havaya, not Shiur Havaya b'Adnai. Shiur Adnai b'Havaya. So Havaya is now the primary thing, and we're going to find Adnai, the godliness that relates to existence, in Havaya, and the godliness that's beyond existence. Remember when we learned this before, there's when you go Mamayla Lamata, God, Atzilus is beyond everything. Ein Sof is also beyond. And then the stages, even on the highest levels, where Ola b'machshavte, or machshava da'ano emlech. What do we say? That now godliness, the energy, divine energy, is beginning to relate to existence. So that's how the relationship to existence is within the divine that's beyond existence. Right now, we've been talking about the divine within existence, and you find the Havaya, the higher levels of godliness, in the divine that relates to existence. Now we're going to look at the Adnai within Havaya. Even though he didn't spell out what Havaya accomplishes here, but clearly, if you may recall, in volume 1, we learned that the Lakus within Nivroim, Ke'er Hagvul, which would be similar to Adnai here, creates existence, and the Eir HaBlikvul creates Bittul in existence. So though he didn't say it explicitly here, it seems that the Bittul, because even though there's Adnai within existence and the Eir and Eliki, but it's still concealed. So by the Aveda starts drawing a Lakus that's higher than existence into the Lakus within existence, and that's why it starts becoming revealed. That's what he said in volume 1. Here he did not say it explicitly, but it seems to be that's the pshat. Because if not, you could just say, why don't you just reveal Elikim? Why don't you just reveal Adnai? Why do you need the Shiur of Havaya ba'Adnai? And as a matter of fact, at the bottom of page 1176, he actually said that, 1176. Yeah. He said there that there's a Lakus in the Elamis, however, it's concealed. So the Gilui is definitely bringing in the levels of Elikus that are even higher than that which was subject to concealment. But now he's going the other way. What's the Avai Adnai b'Havaya? So Shiur Adnai b'Havaya, he says, Hu hiskalus shem Adnai b'shem Havaya. That's the hiskalus, how Adnai is encompassed within Havaya. Remember, in the interface, we want total integration, total fusion. So you can't just say, okay, you know what? I dealt with Elikus, the godliness within existence, and now I'm going to leap to the next level. You always want everything encompasses everything, because that's what a mamutza is, an interface. So there's Havaya and Adnai, and there's now Adnai and Havaya. So even the highest levels of godliness that are the transcendent levels also have within them the beginnings of the divine that's going to relate to existence. We've already learned it at length, but now he's again tying it together in the form of yichud, the yichud of Havaya and Adnai, Shiur of Havaya ba'Adnai. As a matter of fact, I'll take it a step further. Up till now, we were learning, if you remember, all the ways he explained Das Ayin and Das Tachten, the Ayin of Yeshamiti Yeshanivra, he kept saying the Ayin of Yeshamiti relates to godliness, to the source. Ayin of the Yeshanivra relates to existence. Even before the Tzimtzum, we have those two levels. Like Hisnasus Atzmi and the Hisnasus Ala Am. That relates to the Am, to the nation. But now he's saying more than that even in the higher level, you have the lower level, and even in the lower level, you have the higher level. I don't think he said it explicitly till now, that the Das Tachten exists within the Das Elyon, and the Das Elyon exists within the Das Tachten. I think it was hinted to, but I don't recall explicitly saying it. Now he's saying it definitely clearly. I'm just thinking for a moment. Did he say that anywhere? I mean, again, when you look back, of course, it becomes clear as that way. Because Eirei Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum in general is Das Elyon. And yet within there, you have also a Das Tachten, which is the Ano Emlech, Malchus of Ein Sof. You know, Golov Galifu B'Tihiri Allah. Okay, fine. Just pointing that out. So now he's calling it Iskalus Shem Adnai B'Shem Havaya. V'oz, and when that is achieved, when you achieve that yichud, that shiluv, that intertwining, v'oz misachdim ha'esis the Shem Adnai, then the letters of Shem Adnai, Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, become united. Oz misachdim ha'esis the Shem Adnai, dahainu haprotim the esis hadibur, the details of the letters of speech. Remember, the letters of speech create details. They're not like all included in the nucleus of a thought. They break down into details. So when you create a shiluv of Havaya ba'adnai, of Adnai ba'Havaya, the Iskalus, what does that mean? That you're uniting the letters of Adnai, which means the letters of speech, the details of the letters of speech, shehem beribu yischalkus kanal, which they come down in a multitude of details, is kasher elin v'nichlolim b'shem Havaya, as those details of the words, the Dvar Hashem that are broken down, they elevate and are encompassed in Shem Havaya, their source, harihem mesachdim. They become united now. He's going to explain it, but let me just say a few words about it to understand what we're speaking. Remember when we spoke about thought and speech, so the big distinction was that thought is on one state, and dibur is a very different state. He didn't speak about how machshava and dibur talk to each other. Now he is. So there, machshava was that, we called it a field of energy. That was there, that is there on an ongoing basis. It's not yet shaped, but it's already the beginnings of, like you call the level 2, where the seichel is beginning to emerge, or the nefesh is beginning to emerge. Then there's the machshava that is involved in particular faculties, but it's still, he called it a levush miyuchad. It's connected to the soul, and that's why everything is concentrated there, and everything is bisachdus, united. Dibur, on the other hand, is only emerges afterwards, when the details begin to, the faculties have shape and form, and the dibur itself, he explained, goes after a tzimtzum and relates to another and breaks it into details. So let's talk for a moment about how the human being functions. Before you speak, a normal person, intelligent person, they think about what they're going to say. In machshava, the ideas are beginning to take on form and shape on a machshava level, ethereal level, like he said. It doesn't yet have man sapach. We don't have actual expressed letters, but nevertheless, there's a certain shape and a form of an idea that's developed in your mind. Now you begin to speak that idea. You share it with your students, or you share it with another. It's being directed and informed and guided by the machshava, obviously, but it's now not, it doesn't have the full intensity of the thought, but it's still true to the thought, and it's conveying whatever you're thinking about. That's what true communication is. So now the question is, now that it comes in dibur, it's coming to many details. Many details we know, because sometimes we could also get lost in the details. So then there's a step where you want to make sure the dibur is united with the machshava. That the dibur and all the details are reflecting the picture, that the machshava, this machshava is like a snapshot. Like he said at the bottom of last page, he said everything's bisachdus there. And that's why in machshava it takes little time. Here's the words, he said like this. But so therefore speech could wander away and lose sight of the integrity of the original thought. This can happen. You know, sometimes a person starts speaking and they say, where was I? What was I trying to say? The speech can carry you away. So you want to make sure that the speech is aligned with the machshava. And more than that, what he's saying here is that the dibur, adnai, is actually encompassed in the machshava. And when it does that, then there's his achdus. So even though the dibur on its own is different details, But when it goes into Havaya, it all becomes united again. Simple example. Not example, simple application. The Eibishter created the world with Asara Mamoris. We know. Bereshis bara Elikim. Vayemer Elikim, Yehi Oir. Vayehi Oir. Vayemer Elikim, Yehi Rekia, Vayehi Rekia. All the Asara Mamoris. Now, from God's point of view, every mimer, every statement, and every creation is all part of one, like the artist, one picture. It's one narrative. It's a divine narrative. But from the perspective of the recipient, you see Oir, you see Rekia, you see vegetation, you see celestial bodies, you see animals, you see fish, you see human beings, and then you see a multitude of them all. You look at a world like ours, billions and billions of trillions of creatures, of creations, of creatures, of millions and billions of species. I don't know the number. So you could get lost and say, you know what? These are all separate things. You don't necessarily see the machshava achas, the machshava where all this was encompassed. When you, however, do shiluv, Adnai ba'avaya, the skalus of Adnai Havaya, then the Yehi Oir and the Yehi Rekia and the Teitze Eretz Desha and all the specific maimoras, the Dibur, Ha'elyon, is all connected with the machshava, where everything is that one picture with the God's kavanah in it all, as opposed to separate entities. And I'm not talking about separate necessarily in a way that's hepech haTorah. It just means you see separate entities. You don't see the whole art as one picture. So the skalus of dibur and machshava, or adnai and havaya, is what he says here, is creating a Chassidus in the details. That we see the details, you see that higher picture of the artist looking at it all with what's his intention and his thought. That's what he's saying here. So he continues, Ukamoi, and this dibur being nichlal in its source, he says it's kamoi hadibur kasheru adayim bechemdes halev oy b'seichel. Remember, we learned earlier that the levushim are garments for moichin and midas. You have a concept, an idea. Machshav is the garment that expresses it to yourself. Dibur is the garment that expresses it to another. But you first have to have something to express. So the koiches hanefesh is the actual energy, whether it's an intellectual, a cognitive one, an intellectual one, or an emotional one. Then you express it either through machshava and dibur. So before it comes into dibur, it was all encompassed still in your koyach. First you had a chemdes halev, a passion of the heart, and then you expressed it. So he says, what we're talking now is how the skalus of the dibur, as it's rooted back into the chemdes halev. It's interesting, he doesn't see it's rooted in the machshava, as I mentioned before. Let me just see a second. He's going even higher than machshava. He's going into the koiches hanefesh. Chemdes halev b'seichel. U'kamosh shekasa b'sefer shalbein in Perek Chof v'Chof Aleph. He says this in Tanya, chapter 20 and 21. Okay, that's fine. It's true what I said, that it's connected to the thought, but it's even deeper that the dibur is being encompassed in the actual chemdes halev or seichel. That is the faculty or the attribute which the garment of dibur is enclothing. So there's the way the dibur is expressed in details, and the way it's going back. In other words, in the nimshal, it would be God's intention, or chemdes halev, God's desire for whatever He wants, and it's not just the outer expression of it, where it comes down to a multitude of details. It's concluded in the inner intention of the Creator. Okay, fine. That's fine. And what is this? With what level of bittul is this? So he says, "V'hu b'chinas habittul, the kalim, the esosphere is the Atzilus." The bittul we spoke about before was the bittul of biyah, and specifically elam hazeh agashmi, the yesh, hanivra. Now he said you're talking about the bittul of the kalim of Atzilus, of the 10 spheres of Atzilus. The nizbar le'il that was explained earlier. Dibur hamaskel re'ei ha'alef. In the Maimer Re'ei Aleph, he says it's volume 1, back on page 590. What did he explain there? Ha'hefresh, the bitla eir bitla ha'kelim. There was explained what's the difference in the bitl of eir and the bitl of kelim. We spoke about this a bit earlier on the top of the page when we spoke about the kelim's bitl to the eir, like the colors. The difference between the kelim of Atzilus and the kelim of Malchus, of Zah, and the kelim of Malchus. Now he's speaking about the bitl of difference between kelim and eir. So what did we learn there? The bitl eir hu b'chinas dveikus. The bitl of eir is in the form of attachment. The eir is dovuk to the moir. The eir does not become a separate entity ever. Kelim are separate. Kelim are not like the light of the sun. Kelim they're separated from their source. And so then what is the bittul of the kelim? Remember that kelim are also batul talakus, but it's a different type of bittul. It's a bittul of iskalulus. Which means what? Iskalus means that it's the bittul of being encompassed in something greater than you are. Oyer, it's not about being encompassed in something greater. They're attached. So therefore, there's a bittul of the light to its source. Kelim are not attached, at least not with dveikus nikeres. You don't see their attachment. So their bittul is that they are in the presence, what he's going to call now, who are bittul, the head that tfisis mokim. A bittul of feeling nullified and completely not having any standing in the presence of something greater. But the keli is a mitzias. The oir never had that mitzias to be called. It was always dveikus. Kamoi shrago betira, like a candle in the light of the sun. So the candle is not a light, is not an extension of the sunlight. Sunlight is bottled to the sun, but a candle is bottled because it's completely nullified and has no significance in the presence of a greater light, like sunlight. Now I know, if any of you remember well, just a few Maimorim back, we spoke that the Ayin and the Oyer has 4 different levels of Bittul. And one was called also the Bittul of Hedet Tfisas Mokim, if you remember. And he even asked the question, how could you say that about the Oyer? So how does that stem with what we're saying here? You remember that? I'm just looking it up. I want to see a second what he said there. On page 1155, he said, and the first Eifin, he said, it's all due to dveikus. Like Kesser Elyon, yeah. So that's a good question. We have to say that there's 2 different types of bittul in hedet tfisas mokim. By oir, it's hedet tfisas mokim because the oir senses and is attached to the source, and therefore it feels it has no standing. By the kelim hedet tfisas mokim, it's not because it's attached to the source. It's because it just recognizes that the source is greater than it, and therefore gets nullified. So though there's a commonality in the expression hedet tfisas mokim, it's not the same type of bittul. I can elaborate about this, but I'd rather first continue here. Just keep that in mind, that he did call Oyer also a level of Hedet Tfisas Mokim, but in Oyer he also talked about higher levels of Bittul. Ein Zoloscha, Efes Biltecha, and all the way to the fourth level. But here, the key difference is to remember that we're talking about Hiskalulus as opposed to Dvekus. So Dvekus is attachment, like the sunlight to the sun, and Hiskalulus is like the candle in the face of the sun. And as was explained earlier, Dibra Maskal Boy El Pare. Oh, that's a while back. Wow. I remember this topic was discussed also in volume 1. Okay, the Rebbe Rashab is referring to volume 2 now. By the way, that's the minor with the Tzimtzumim I just read from. Yeah, I knew there was some connection there, right? Okay. So what do we learn there? That Bittul, the Hedet Tfisas Mokim, down below they say you have to add the word Mokim, that this Bittul and the lack of standing, that it's completely it's nullified in the presence of something higher, you could think is a superficial Bittul. Because the candle hasn't really lost its identity. It just, as we learned, it's only a Bittul in its pashtus. It's only lost its function. It right now has no value when the sun is shining. But when the sun sets, or when the sun is not there, the candle is still the same candle, and it will then radiate and have a function and illuminate a dark room or a dark street. So you could argue that Hedet Tfisas Mokim is just a circumstantial Bittul, meaning right now it's in the presence of something greater, but it didn't really lose its ego, so to speak. It's still there, it's just now quiet because of the sun. So he said, no. We learned there that the Bittul, the Hedet Tfisas Mokim, who gam kem Bittul b'metzias. It's also a Bittul b'metzias, meaning that it also affects the very entity. Now with a candle, it may not affect the candle because the Gashmi is the candle does not change. But in Ruchnius, this Bittul of Iskalus, of the Kalim of Atzilus, is also a Bittul Metzias. It also affects them. That's what we learned back then. This is Yichudei. That which became Kalim of Atzilus recognizes that it's really only part of divine emanation. It doesn't have any value of its own. So therefore, Adnai is recognizing not its role in relation to existence, its role in relation to its source. That Havaya Adnai ba'Havaya is the Kalim of Atzilus recognizing that we are really just an extension of Elokus. The Oyer recognizes it in its very personality, it's attached to it. The Kalim recognizing how insignificant they are in the presence of the higher levels of Elokus. And this is what he's calling Yichudei Allah. So in this context, Yichudei Allah would be, it's all about Elokus, and the lower levels recognizing they're all part of that higher state. And Yichudei Allah would be existence, recognizing the Elokus within existence. Okay. Vihine. Does anybody have any questions? Let's start with questions here before I read on. I have to say that this is, even though it's understandable, but it's very bekitzer. Because I believe the Rebbe Rashab is, of course, relying that we had learned all the Maimorim before about Birurim, and the Maimorim he's referring to here. So when you know all that it says there, here he doesn't have to repeat the whole thing. So he's just summing it up in context of what we're discussing here. So those of us that don't remember what we learned or have never learned it, it could be could throw you because you see he's not really elaborating. He's just saying it very briefly. Havaya Adnai scholars. I'm explaining it a bit more, but it's still not the full-blown explanation as it was there earlier. So I'll try to bring in more from what we learned for those that have not learned it or don't remember, but I just wanted to point it out. So don't feel like, you're missing something. The fact is, it's very intentional. The Rebbe Rashab is not, he's just giving us the footnote, the sources. He's not repeating all that discussion. So I just wanted to make that point because it's very clear that he's very summarizing here. Okay? Now we continue.
Rabbi Jacobson, the Shiluv from Milamata Lamaila and from Adnai into Havaya or into Havaya. When I looked up the word Shiluv in English, it gives several different very interesting translations. One is combination, one is integration, one is a mixture, and one is a blend. It seems to me that there is a difference between a blend where you lose the two things that are combining lose their individual identity, whereas combining or integration, they both maintain it, it seems, and yet they're working together, so to speak. Do these two terms apply to the two different levels of Yehudi law and Yehudi Tata, meaning one would be more of a combination and one would be a blend? Or how does that work out, if you don't mind trying to explain that, those two different levels of Shiluv?
I hear you. Let me ask you, where did you see those four translations?
On reverse, it's a Hebrew site that translates English in Hebrew.
Okay.
I thought it was pretty interesting, but
yeah. So when you look in the, you probably weren't here when I discussed it more at length. When we first started this topic, it was first mentioned on the top of page 1177. So in the class there, I discussed what Shiluv means. Let me sum up what I said. The word I'm not surprised that you saw in a dictionary. The word Shiluv in the context here is from Kabbalah. So we have to look at the translations of Tanya in two places, in chapter 21 and Shiur V'Amunah chapter 27. In Tanya chapter 21 and Shiur V'Amunah chapter 7, the Alter Rebbe uses the word, brings it. The translations in Tanya don't use any of the four that you just mentioned.
No.
They don't use any of the four you just mentioned. They use, I use the word intertwined. Shiluv really means intertwined. It's like when you braid, like, a Havdalah candle, that's called Shiluv. Intertwined, I saw there they use the word interwoven. I'm sorry, I use the word interwoven. They use the word intertwined in the different translations. And in one place, they do use the word alternate, to alternate. I think alternate I think it's alternate. So it's interesting the definitions you just brought. I would need to think about it some more, but I will say this. We can't go by English translations to explain Shiluv. We have to go by the Hebrew intention of what the word Shiluv means. And then you have to find the English word that fits that. So I don't feel that we have to force it into those four different translations you just offered. So what I would say in simple English, without using any words, we'll get back to the word Shiluv in a moment, that Havaya and Adnai, when we speak it, it's Adnai. When we write it, it's Havaya. They both have four letters. The word Shiluv Adnai Ba'Havaya means that you are, like he says there, if you look there, he says there that Shiluv is the first letter, is the dominant one. So when you speak Havaya Ba'Adnai, then the primary thing is Adnai, and within it now is working Havaya within the Adnai. When you're talking about Havaya, Adnai Ba'Havaya, which is Yichudei law, there the primary thing is the Yud of Havaya, like he said. And it's Adnai as it works within Havaya. So I don't know if I would use the words blend, integrate, fuse, or I remember all the words. I would say that let's understand the Havana of what is going on here. I would say it's within the divine perspective from above. He also includes, that also encompasses the relationship with below. So in other words, Shiluv, Adnai, Ba'Havaya would mean, like he just said, the Kalim of Atzilus that have a particular function. The Kali of Chesed, the Gvura, Now it's recognizing and being Chassidus encompassed in a greater state of what the divine intention is. So you can use many different words. Is the Shiur of Havaya and Adnai, since we use the word Shiur, similar to the Shiur of Adnai b'Havaya? You could say there's some commonality. I don't know if it has to be the same. The point being, however, is that, like using the example of the artist, is the art an expression of the artist? That's when the Kalim of Atzilus, all they are is an expression of the source. So therefore, they're the headed tfisa smokim. They have no standing of their own because they're all encompassed in that. Or are we talking about the artist's intention in the art? That's das tachten. So however you explain this, you can explain it with all kinds of words. They're all fine as long as they're true to this idea. So I would not so be focused on the word intertwined or interwoven, even though those are the technical translations used, but that's what it really means. It's the concept that I would focus on. Now, is that a form of a blend and integration? Yes, it is. It is. Is it losing its identity or not losing its identity? In a certain way, when the Kalim of Atzilus, when the candle is in the light of the sun, is it losing its identity? Some way yes, and some way no. Like he said, it's headed tfisas makim, but it's a bittul b'mitzias, because it's completely encompassed now in the bigger picture. It's like saying when you read a book, or the same thing with art, you look at the words, the few words in a book, in a sefer. What are they in context of the whole theme of the sefer? They're bittul b'mitzias. Yes, they're important because they need to express the idea. From the point of view of the reader who's just building the story step by step, then the words and the chapters are important. But from the point of view of the author, all the words are important, but they're all part of a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is dominating. In Yichud Elah, the big picture is dominating. In Yichud Tatah, the small picture of existence is dominating. And you're looking to find the artist within the art, and in Yichud Elah, the art within the artist, if you wish. That's how I would explain it. And now we can now analyze what words are best to use for it. You follow what I'm saying? I'll add one more point. There's also levels, I'm sure, of bittul. Yichud Elah, Yichud Torah are not just two static levels. There's levels where the shiluv can be deeper and deeper and deeper. So it could be a blend and integration. What were the other two words you used?
It was combination, integration, mixture, blend, and incorporate.
So you know what? I mean, if you really want to insist, you could probably find all four levels in this bittul that we're describing now.
Whoa, that's good. But good.
I wouldn't necessarily go there because unless there's a mimer that talks about it, it would be a lot of speculation. But in Inyan, yeah, of course you can explain levels. Like, when you see the art within the artist or the artist within the art, I'm sure there's many stages and many levels of how you see that integration. That's what I would say about this.
But Bittul Metzias versus Bittul Yesh, wouldn't you say Bittul Metzias could be that level of losing the individual, would be a blend?
No, it would not be about Bittul Metzias means that the primary thing is the big picture. It's Elikus. And this is the details that are encompassed in Elikus. That's the word that's how he's explaining it here. You don't get focused on the word Bittul Metzias, Bittul Hayesh. Bittul Hayesh means its existence seeing the Ayin and being bottled. The Yesh is bottled to the Ayin Eliki. In Bittul Metzias, in Yichud Elah, it's the Ayin being bottled to the higher levels of Elikus, of the source.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's saying right here. Is it a deeper bittul? Of course it's a deeper bittul. So therefore you're saying whether the shiluv is a deeper one? It's a different shiluv. It's Adnai and Havaya, and here it's Havaya and Adnai. So there's different purposes in this integration, if you wish.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can give you a lot of scenarios where you could say the Bittul Hayesh could be even more integrated with the Ayin than Bittul Metzias, because Bittul Metzias, you're also more distant from your source. In Bittul Hayesh, you could say, I totally am absorbed in the Elikus that I relate to. So it's a lower level of Elikus, but it's a higher level of Bittul in a way. But I don't want to go there. It's going to get a little complicated if we do that.
Thank you.
Anyway, the topic isn't over. If you see, I'm going to stop here, but if you look, Vihine, he's going to continue to talk about this. So we're not finished. But I'll stop here at the bottom of page 1179. I will say Sunday, I have already a previous engagement at 10 o'clock. I'm speaking for the shluchis. So we have two options. We either can do it at 11 or a little after 11, or we can do it, we can just resume on Monday. You guys have a preference?
11 o'clock is fine.
How about everybody else?
I'm in for 11.
So let's just move it from 10 to 11. Maybe let's make it 11:15 to be positive, because I'm, okay?
Yeah, it's good. If you take questions, you might go 11:30, 11:40.
I'm going to stop here at the bottom of 1179. That's not the time we're